Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube video. Today I'll be solving a problem under the topic differential calculus, and the problem is to find the derivative of y equals 2x squared plus 1 over x from first principle. Now I'm going to introduce you to the formula I intend using to solve the problem, and the formula is the derivative of y with respect to x, which is simply read dy divided by dx, equals the limits as delta x approaches 0. Delta x stands for small increment in x of y plus delta y minus y divided by delta x, where delta y and delta x stands for small increment in y and small increment in x respectively, and this fraction can be reduced further. So I will replicate this limit as delta x approaches 0 of delta y divided by delta x, because y minus y equals 0, so we'll be left with delta y divided by delta x. So this is the formula I'm going to be using to solve this problem from first principle. Now I'll write my question. Y equals 2x to the power of 2 plus 1 divided by x. I'll christen this equation 1. And then I'll have y plus delta y, that is a small increment in y, equals 2 into brackets x plus delta x. I'll close the bracket to the power of 2 because this is x to the power of 2 plus 1 divided by this x plus delta x. As I've mentioned earlier, delta x stands for small increment in x, so I need to expand this bracket. So I'll replicate the left hand side of this equation. Y plus delta y equals 2. We'll open a bracket. X times x is x to the power of 2 plus 2 times x times delta x. Plus times plus is plus. Delta x times delta x is delta x to the power of 2. I'll close the bracket, plus, and then I'll replicate this fraction, 1 divided by x plus delta x. So I need to expand, open up this bracket and multiply each and every one of the terms of the bracket with 2. So I'll replicate the left hand side of the equation, this equation, y plus delta y equals 2 times x squared is 2x squared, plus 2 times 2x delta x is 4x delta x, plus 2 times delta x to the power of 2 is 2 delta x to the power of 2, plus 1 divided by x plus delta x. So we are done expanding the right hand side of this equation, so I can christen this equation 2. And then I will subtract equation 1 from equation 2. So the left hand side of equation 2, y plus delta y, minus the left hand side of equation 1, equals the right hand side of equation 2 minus the right hand side of equation 1. And so looking at the left hand side of this equation, we can see that y can cancel y, so that y minus y is 0, and then we'll be left with delta y equals this fraction minus, now I had to pause because if I open up this bracket, the negative sign will be used to multiply each and every one of the terms of the content of this bracket. Now here we have plus 2x squared, but the positive sign is not usually written, so I will say minus times plus is minus. In the same vein, there's a plus here. Minus times plus is minus. So if I'm to open up this bracket, I'll have 2x squared minus 1 divided by x. So looking at this equation, 2x squared minus 2x squared is 0. So I'll cancel 2x squared minus 2x squared, 0. So I'll be left with this algebraic expression and this algebraic fraction. So delta y equals 4x delta x plus 2 delta x to the power of 2 plus 1 divided by x plus delta x minus 1 divided by x. Next thing is to divide through, that is, we'll divide the left hand side and the right hand side by delta x. So I'll have delta y divided by delta x equals 1 divided by delta x. I'll open up a big bracket and then I'll replicate the entire right hand side of this equation, and then I'll close up my bracket. So I need to solve the right hand side further. So for me to do that, I'll replicate the left hand side. Delta y divided by delta x equals, I'll pick it piecewise, 4x delta x divided by the denominator here, delta x, then the positive sign plus, because I'm using 1 over delta x to multiply this term, and this term coupled with this term too. So 2 delta x to the power of 2 divided by delta x, then the positive sign again. Now I'll have to write 1 divided by delta x. Now the reason is because I have two fractions here that requires further simplification. So I'll open up a bracket and then I'll replicate these two algebraic fractions. I'll close up the bracket. So we're making progress. At the numerator and denominator end here, we have delta x and delta x. So I'll say delta x divided by delta x is 1. So I'll be left with 4x. That's from this algebraic fraction. I'll move to the next algebraic fraction. I have delta x and delta x. But here I have 2 delta x. That is delta x times delta s, which boils down to delta x to the power of 2. So I can say delta s cancels 1 delta x and I'll be left with 1 delta x. So I'll replicate this equation in a simpler way now. So I have delta y divided by delta x equals, this fraction has reduced to 4x plus, this fraction has reduced to 2 delta x plus 1 divided by delta x. I'll open up a bracket. Now looking at this fraction, for me to resolve it, I need to find the LCM of the denominators. So the simple LCM of the denominator is to multiply x plus delta x by x. So I'll have x, open a bracket, x plus delta x, that's the LCM. And I said this denominator divided by this denominator, I'll be left with x. So x times 1 is x. The sign here is minus. This denominator divided by x, I'll be left with x plus delta x, because x will cancel x and I'll be left with x plus delta x. So x plus delta x times 1, I have x plus delta x. Then I close up the bracket. So I wrote this to like as a form of a recap of the last line of the previous slide. So I'll replicate this. Delta y divided by delta x equals 4x plus 2 delta x plus 1 divided by delta x. I'll open up a bracket. Now looking at the denominator, I can expand the bracket. X times x is x to the power of 2 plus x times delta x is x delta x, and then I'll rule my line. So looking at the numerator, I have x, then minus sign. Now for me to open up this bracket, it will be similar to what happened in the previous slide, just that the content of the bracket isn't same. So I have a positive sign here, and as I've mentioned earlier, it's not usually shown, but there's a positive sign here. So I'll say minus times plus is minus, minus times plus is minus. So if I'm to open up this bracket, I'll have minus x minus delta x. So we can see minus x minus delta x. I close up the bracket. So x minus x is 0. So I'll be left with minus delta x. Again, I replicate the left hand side of this equation. Delta y divided by delta x equals 4x plus 2 delta x. Now plus times minus is minus. So that looks good, right? So I'll have 1 divided by delta x. I'll open up a bracket. Now I've resolved the numerator into a simpler form, and I'm left with delta x. I'll rule my line and I'll replicate the denominator, x squared plus x delta x. I close up the bracket. So delta x is at the denominator end of this fraction, and delta x is at the numerator end of this fraction. So since this fraction is multiplying this bracket, so I can easily cancel out numerator at the end of, the numerator end of this fraction divided by the denominator end. So delta x divided by delta s is 1. Delta x divided by delta x is 1. So 1 times 1 is 1. So I've succeeded in making the entire numerator here to be 1, and the denominator here is x squared plus x delta x. So I have delta y divided by delta x equals 4x plus 2 delta x minus 1 divided by x squared plus x delta x. So this is the simplest form. We can have the right hand side of this equation, and the essence of simplifying it to this simpler form is to make sure that we can easily resolve delta x because we are to find the limits as delta s finally approaches 0. Therefore, I'll find the limits as delta x approaches 0 of delta y divided by delta s, which is equal to, I'll replicate the right hand side of this equation, 4x plus 2 delta x minus 1 divided by x squared plus x delta x. So as delta x finally approaches 0, which means delta x here will be equal to 0. And so 0 times 2 is 0. So this entire term will become equal to 0. And then we'll go to the denominator of this fraction. Delta x2 will be equal to 0 as delta limit as delta x approaches 0, delta x will eventually be equal to 0. And so x times 0 is 0. So I'll be left with 1 divided by x squared. So this looks good. Hence, the derivative of y with respect to x of our question, which is 2x squared plus 1 divided by x, will now be equal to 4x minus 1 divided by x squared. And so this is the derivative of 2x squared plus 1 divided by x from first principle. Thank you for watching this YouTube video. I do hope it was helpful to you. Kindly share it with your friends, and you do well by clicking the like and subscribe button, because if you click the subscribe button, if you have any other YouTube video, you will receive notification. Thank you.